You'll see.
I'm coming back to NCIS in the fall as Tony DiNozzo. How do I tell people?
I'll see you in the fall.
Here's a structural coincidence in this franchise that I don't think anyone has actually sat with properly. This fall, 2 shows are simultaneously exploring the exact same relationship from opposite ends of a 30-year timeline. NCIS Origins is showing us a Gibbs who is still learning how to become the man everyone thinks they already know. And NCIS Season 24 is bringing back the one person who absorbed that finished version of Gibbs so completely that he became, for 13 years, the closest thing to a living translation of him. I don't think this is a coincidence. CBS is fully advertising. But I think it's the most interesting thing happening in this franchise right now, and it has almost nothing to do with ratings. Let me walk through why. Start with what NCIS Origins is actually built around, because I don't think it gets discussed as what it really is. It's set in 1991, following a Gibbs who has been an NIS agent for exactly 4 months. Austin Stowell, who plays him, has described this Gibbs precisely. It's only 4 months since losing his wife Shannon and daughter Kelly, murdered, and in his own eyes, murdered because of him. Stowell put it directly. He's got to learn how to love himself first before that becomes an option again. This is not the Gibbs anyone remembers. Showrunner David J. North said it plainly to TV Insider before the show even premiered. The Gibbs that Gina and I wrote for so many years had learned to push it all that emotion down. This Gibbs hasn't learned that yet. Deadline's premiere interview even confirmed a detail most casual fans never knew. This Gibbs failed his psych evaluation. The unshakable, silent, instinctual leader that an entire generation of NCIS fans built their idea of masculine competence around started out as someone the system almost didn't let through the door. And here's the part I think actually matters for understanding what's happening this fall. That raw, unfinished Gibbs didn't build himself. He was placed on a team led by Mike Franks, played by Kyle Schmid, a mentor figure who watched over him, tested him, and slowly turned instinct into discipline. Gibbs had a Gibbs. Before there was ever a version of this man capable of shaping Tony DiNozzo into a federal agent, there was a wounded 30-something being shaped by someone else entirely. The franchise has quietly built an entire show around the idea that mentorship in this universe is recursive. It doesn't originate anywhere. It just gets passed down imperfectly from one broken person who got lucky enough to have someone believe in them to the next. Now hold that thought and walk it forward 12 years to a bullpen in Washington in 2003, where a fully formed Gibbs, silent, unreadable, already carrying the finished version of everything Franks helped build in him, meets a loud, undisciplined, deeply talented young agent named Tony DiNozzo. I want to actually look at what that relationship was mechanically, rather than just gesture at mentor and student, because I think the specifics matter for understanding what Tony walking back into that building now actually represents. Michael Weatherly has talked about one specific unscripted line that ended up defining the whole dynamic. In a season 6 episode, Tony blurts out, "I'm not Gibbs," to Abby unprompted, and it stayed in the final cut because, as Weatherly explained it, the whole relationship hinged on that exact anxiety. Without Gibbs, DiNozzo would lose sight of the mission entirely. He didn't love the head slaps, but he understood the function of them. Gibbs trusted DiNozzo precisely because DiNozzo trusted Gibbs enough to let his own chaos be managed by someone else. That's not a boss-employee relationship. That's the exact same structure Origins is showing us between young Gibbs and Franks, just running in the opposite direction. Instead of a wounded man being organized by a mentor, you've got a naturally undisciplined man being organized by one. And there's a smaller detail that I think says more than any big dramatic scene could. For years, one of the show's most consistent running bits was Tony talking about Gibbs behind his back, only to realize he's standing right behind me, isn't he? That Gibbs had silently materialized directly behind him the entire time. It became such a signature beat that other characters started doing it as a bit. McGee at one point describing Tony's own management style to a probie by saying he walks around with that peacock strut and that smirk, in a direct, knowing echo of Gibbs' presence. Tony didn't just learn from Gibbs. Somewhere across 13 seasons, without ever losing his own personality, he started running some of Gibbs' own code underneath his. Which brings me to the actual point of this whole video. When Weatherly left the show in 2016, one entertainment writer covering the exit described it precisely. When playing number 2 no longer fit DiNozzo, Weatherly left the series, passing the baton to Sean Murray's McGee. That's exactly what happened. McGee didn't just fill a staffing gap. He inherited the specific role of senior agent that Tony had occupied under Gibbs for 13 years, and he's held that position in one form or another for nearly a decade since. First under Gibbs directly, then through the transition to Parker, all the way to right now, where he's the only person left on that current team who remembers what the building felt like when Gibbs was actually in it every day. So think very specifically about what it means for Tony to walk back into that bullpen this fall. He is not walking into a team that needs a mentor from scratch. He's walking into a team where McGee has already quietly, functionally become the thing Tony himself used to be, the senior agent who absorbed Gibbs' way of operating and has been running it in his own voice for years. Tony isn't returning to teach McGee what Gibbs meant. McGee already knows. What Tony actually represents walking back through those doors is something stranger and more interesting than a mentor arriving. It's two different people who both learned the exact same language from the exact same source, meeting again after one of them has spent a decade speaking it fluently to a completely new generation who never met the person who invented it. Knight has never worked a single day under Gibbs. Casey came up entirely in the Parker era. For that entire current team, Gibbs' rules are folklore. Quoted, referenced, half-remembered rules like Rule 8. Never take anything for granted, passed down as institutional scripture, rather than something anyone actually watched Gibbs enforce in real time. Tony is the last living person walking back into that specific building who doesn't need the rules explained to him because he was there when they were still just the way one particular man ran his life. Not yet a legend. McGee has been quietly holding that same authority for years without anyone framing it that way. And now the two people who both absorbed the same source material in the same building, 13 years apart from each other, are going to have to figure out what that shared inheritance actually means to them. Now that neither of them is the version of themselves Gibbs originally shaped. And underneath all of it, on a completely separate screen, airing the same season, we're being shown the actual foundation this entire chain was built on. A 20-something Gibbs who failed his psych eval, who hadn't yet learned to push any of it down, being held together by Mike Franks the exact same way Tony was later held together by him. NCIS Origins isn't just prequel content running in parallel to satisfy nostalgia. It's quietly revealing that the version of Gibbs who shaped Tony was never the origin of anything. He was just the next name in a chain that already existed before he showed up, wounded, 4 months into the job, wondering if he'd survive it. I don't think CBS built this specifically to be a meditation on generational mentorship. I think they built it because Mark Harmon and Michael Weatherly are both beloved and both available. But I do think it's the most genuinely interesting thing sitting underneath everything else happening in this franchise right now. Not who saves which show, not who sits in which chair, but the quiet, recursive structure of who taught whom, running backward and forward across the same season on the same network. Almost by accident, NCIS Season 24 premieres this fall on CBS, Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. NCIS Origins Season 3 with Mark Harmon returning for every episode follows the same night. Drop a comment and tell me, do you think Tony sees himself in McGee the way Gibbs must have once seen himself in Frank's old team? And now that we know Gibbs almost didn't make it through his own psych eval, does that change how you think about every rule he ever handed down to Tony? Because I honestly think the whole DiNozzo era only makes sense once you understand exactly how unfinished the man teaching him actually was.